Hey, Nicole Holland here. This is episode 49.
You're listening to the Business Building Rockstar Show, where your host, Nicole Holland, gets the lowdown from today's most talented, inspiring, and successful entrepreneurs on what it really takes to reach rockstar status.
Do you want to get your message out in a bigger way by being a guest on a web show or podcast just like this? If you do, text the letters I am ready to 33444 and I will send you free of charge a guide called How to Be a Great Guest. Don't make rookie mistakes that so many people do when they're starting out. Get known as a great guest that hosts search for free by texting I am ready to 33444. So to spell that out, it's the letters I am READY to 33444 and I will send you a complimentary copy of my guide, How to Be a Great Guest. Man, oh man, I am so excited to bring you this episode. It's been really hard to sit on. My friend Mike Pisciotta has such an inspiring, phenomenal story. During this episode, Mike opens up to me about how he changed his life from being a drug-addicted teenager, doing 10 years in prison, and now being an extremely sought-after marketing expert along with his wife, Robin. Mike is on a mission to change the world through his story and his experience. And I have to say, most of us have had someone in our life or have someone in our life that can really benefit from hearing this story. If you know anyone who is somehow off their path right now, or who doesn't believe that success is available to them because of their circumstances, I urge you, get them to listen to this episode. It could be the one thing that they need to hear to change their life. And with that, let's jump right in. Hey there, entrepreneur. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Building Rockstars Show. Today's guest is somebody I am super excited to be hanging out with. His name is Mike Pisciotta. He's the co-founder of Marketing Your Purpose, along with his wife, Robin, an online marketing company focusing on helping coaches, trainers, speakers, and entrepreneurs leverage and maximize every ounce of online marketing through funnels, automation, and conversion techniques so that they can actually enjoy freedom, which is why they became entrepreneurs in the first place. Mike is a speaker, coach, and the creator of the Marketing Game Changer program. Mike's mission is to empower entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools to build radically successful businesses in creative, techie ways so they can make a major impact while increasing their profitability in a major way. Mike has been featured in Space Coast Business Magazine, Advantages Magazine, Resource CEO, YFS Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO Nation, and several other online publications, as well as online all over the place, podcasts and summits and you name it. And Mike has just put out a book that I'm going to have him tell us about in just a little bit. Mike, are you ready to rock?
Let's do this. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Thanks for being here. So I love your story so much. I love you. I love Robin. I love everything you guys are up to. And
well, thanks.
Yeah, we got to hang out for the Business Building Rockstar Summit 2015. You guys talked about how to use Facebook and leverage that platform to get more clients and build your business. And you guys have funnel fanatic, like you're just doing so many things. And your story about how you wound up getting here is fascinating to me. So why don't you tell listeners a little bit more about what it is that you do, and then we'll dig into the sweet stuff.
Cool. So you kind of summed it up. My wife and I, we have, our business is marketingyourpurpose.com, and we are, coaches, consultants, I'd probably say we're more strategic development for all things online marketing. We specialize in funnels, Facebook ads, conversion optimization. And recently we just started another business to kind of just test our skills of online marketing. And we are in now a couple of e-commerce niche physical product spaces, and it is doing incredibly well. We're actually looking, we should break the $1 million sales mark this year.
With t-shirts, yeah?
Yeah, that's just one part of it. We're in a lot of different ones. We have T-shirts, phone cases. We do physical products in a lot of different niches, ranging from the sports niche to cameras and camping and fishing and guns and just anything that you can think of that's highly niche. Like we're there, and it's actually a lot of fun. Selling from like B to C is way different than the world that we're used to of, direct to entrepreneurs and the coaching space and the info space. It's really, really different. And it's actually just a lot of fun. So you were kind of asking about the story. A lot of folks kind of see us now and, here I am, where we are now, building a 7-figure business and, all the different things that we got going on. But it hasn't always been like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So no, go ahead. I was going to ask you about like when you were really little, because it hasn't always been like that for sure. Like this might be one of the most interesting stories I've ever heard. I come from a background in youth services, working with at-risk youth and law enforcement. And so when I heard your story, I was like, whoa. But before we get to that, I want to go back to like the very beginning.
Okay.
When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Wow.
When you were like little John size.
I don't know. Here's the thing, man. And here's this. It's funny because we were just talking about this the other day, my wife and I, in, looking at my son. You mentioned my son, John, who's 5, and he's at that age of, he wants to be all these different things. Every day it's something new and stuff. And I look back and Robin was like, what do you remember? Like, what did you want to do or what did you want to be when you grew up? Or like, what were your dreams or this and that? And it was unfortunately, it was kind of a hard reach for me because I didn't grow up in a world or in an environment where dreaming was encouraged or was something that like we did. Like I wasn't really exposed to that, man. And it was kind of sad for a moment when we had this conversation. And I look back like into my youth and was like, wow, I really can't remember really ever like wanting to do anything really great. And I remember as I grew up into like, the teenage years and stuff, the dream and, like what I wanted to be was just better at being a criminal, which is really unfortunate, which kind of ties into now people are like, whoa, what does that mean? Where's this going? So,
yeah. So let's talk about that. So when you were growing up, then dreams obviously weren't nurtured. What was it like when you were, let's say from, very young to before high school? What was the story then?
So, I grew up in a home where, drugs were pretty prevalent. I did have both my mom and my dad, which was kind of uncommon for where I grew up and most of the folks, kids my age where I grew up. And though I did have mom and dad there, they were there. Their relationship was definitely not a model marriage by any means. There was drugs in the home. And I think most of the prevalent mindsets that I saw were just tremendously victimized. Like everything that happened to us in life and where we were in life was always somebody else's fault. It was always, my dad's boss's fault or the neighborhood, or it was the police or the judge or the school district or the principal. So I think one of the things that I learned as a kid up to high school, and this is what really carried me over, was I learned that, it was never my fault. It was never the choices that I made. And, I was continuously in and out of trouble as a kid. And it was always somebody else's fault. So personal responsibility was something I'd never learned. And as I went into high school, you could imagine that growing and, festering. And so as I entered high school, I entered with no respect for authority. And couple that with it's everybody else's fault. And you have like this perfect storm for massively disrespectful, problematic kid.
Yeah, definitely. And it's almost like I found, because again, I've worked with at-risk youth most of my career, and it's like an entitlement thing. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you grew up in that environment and that's what you were taught, that it was never your fault. But at some point later in life, you got to figure out that you can create your reality.
Yes.
So when you went for high school, and we'll just jump ahead because we've kind of already alluded to it a few times, you did become a principal. So how did that happen?
So high school was very short-lived. It lasted maybe a year, and then I decided that getting high and selling drugs and just doing the wrong thing was a far better route for me, right? So that route carried me through up to 18. And so here's what happens is, I'm following this route. I get addicted to drugs and just the street life and all that comes along with that. And I wake up in a jail cell and I'm 18. I have absolutely no idea why I'm there. It's about 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm partially sobering up. I'm still high from whatever happened the night before. And there was this affidavit in my cell that said I was being charged with 2 counts of armed robbery. And I had no idea what I'd done. And the officer comes and he takes me out of the cell as he can tell that I'm pretty frazzled, almost suicidal, just completely shaken and all that can come along with that. He takes me outside and I had 2 co-defendants as well, 2 other guys that were with us. And I learned that we'd robbed 2 convenience stores. Thankfully, nobody was hurt in anything that happened. And as I'm learning of this and realizing, wow, dude, you literally did this and have no recollection of it at all. And I found out that the night before the night when the crimes had happened, I probably shouldn't have survived it. I had taken so much Xanax and drank so much alcohol together with it that my liver should have shut down and I shouldn't have woken up. That's what they had told me in jail, that like, wow, buddy, you are very lucky that you're even here to even face the crimes. You should not have survived it. And so I guess I'd blacked out, no idea what had happened. And I'm extremely thankful that that did happen as I look back, because that moment of waking up in that cell and realizing what I'd done and what I've allowed my life to become was kind of like a brick wall for me. Like it really just hit me like, wow, dude, here you are and you're facing Lord knows what. At that time, they could have really given me any amount of time that they wanted to. Like it could have been 35, it could have been 100 years, right? And I knew that it was probably going to be a long time. And so seeing that and just realizing, I think, was the very first moment in my 18 years of life that I began to take personal responsibility for the direction of my life. I began to see at that moment that I've been lying to myself and the environment has been lying to me that it's everybody. It's my fault. I did this to myself. Look at where I am. Look at what you've created, man. And it really woke me up. It really slapped me in the face.
Mm-hmm. Then what? I mean, I've been inside and
okay.
Guys that do have that awakening and holy cow, what did I do?
Certainly.
And then they fall into prison life and nothing changes. So Then they get out and they come back and they get out and they come back.
Yep.
They didn't go that route. Something did change. So how did that play out?
So there was a couple of things that took place. At that moment in that jail cell, I'd made a commitment to God that I was going to just immerse myself in the Bible and give God place in my life to change me. I knew that I needed something to change who I was. Character was tremendously lacking. And so as I went through the court process of, getting sentenced and this and that, they gave me 10 years in prison at the age of 18. And initially it really, as you can imagine, it really shook me. And I was, pretty angry about the situation. And I remember feeling that, wow, I'm 18. You've given me 10 years in prison. That's more than half of my life up to this point. And I also realized that I'm going to be 28 years old when I walk out of prison. What the heck am I going to do? Everybody that's my age at that time in life, they're settled in their careers, they're married, families, they've got the house, the kids, the picket fence, everything's already set for them. Here I am, I'm going to walk out of a prison with no skills, no direction, and nothing but a criminal record to try to fend for myself. And I remember this one pivotal day. I had just gotten from the county system into the actual state prison system, and I was in my cell, and I was exercising, and I was just in the middle of kind of working out, and I was praying and having this kind of internal conversation going on inside of me, and I just had this realization that, you know what, Mike? You gave them 10 years of your freedom. It was you, it was your choices. You gave that to them. And I also realized that what I had a choice to not give them was 10 years of life. And so for me, that meant, even though I had 10 years to spend in prison, and a lot of guys just feel like, as you share, you've been around this, so they give up. They give up on life. They feel like everything's over, that's it, and they become a product of the system. And I realized that you know what? I still have a chance. There's still a lot of life ahead of me. And even though I got to spend 10 years inside this prison, they're not going to stop me from living. And what that meant for me was I was going to spend every waking moment to improve myself, to change myself, to prepare myself, to walk out of those gates at some point in the next, in 9 years at that point, to walk out and make something out of myself. And I had no idea what that was going to be. And so over the next 9 years, I used every moment that I had to learn business, to learn marketing. I learned to read, write, and speak 5 foreign languages, immersed myself, as I shared, in the Bible, physical development, spiritual development, mental, everything that I could get my hands on and utilize my time to prepare myself to never be the guy that came back to prison again. I did.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the Bible. Is this something that you found God when you got in, or was this something that were you already religious before you got in?
No, I wasn't. I really wasn't exposed to anything religious by any means as a kid. It wasn't, it wasn't something. So no, it just, I would say in my youth, I did go like to juvenile detentions and stuff. And a lot of times going like to church services was the only way to get out of your cell. Mm-hmm. So I would go, as a kid. So I did have like probably some exposure, if you will. But, being in prison, I think I would accredit probably the fear, the fear of what was ahead of me, the fear of what they could do to me, like how much time they could do to me is I was kind of like, God, if you don't help me, nobody could. And I think it was kind of probably a selfish motive. I'm like, hey, God, I kind of need you to kind of put one in there for me here, man. Mm-hmm. And, that was kind of my motive. And I personally think, I believe that God used that. He used my desperation, my fear, my kind of like, hey, man, I need some help, and used that to develop character in me, man. And so as I spent my time in prison, just as well as I do, that the environment is designed to make you fail and to continue to make you fail. Like, it's not like you go in there and it's like college where they're trying to help you out and there's all of these positive things to help you move forward in life. Everything is designed to keep you in that cycle of what brought you there, man. All of the inmates, they're just mostly focused on either gambling or getting high or being better criminals. And so it really took a daily commitment. I shared that I decided that I wasn't going to give them 10 years of my life. Well, that commitment wasn't something I just made that one time at 19. It was something that I had to make every single day because everything around me was consistently trying to pull me back in. And I use the analogy of like these crabs in a bucket. You have a bucket full of crabs and there's one of those little guys is desperately trying to get out of the bucket. Well, all the other ones are hanging onto his legs and pulling him back in. And that's exactly what prison is like. You're that one crab and you're trying to get out. I don't want to be here. I don't want to, continue to come back and make this the cycle of my life. While all of the other ones are fighting to keep you inside the bucket.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about that just a little bit because, many people might not be aware of this. In fact, I would imagine most people aren't, that, having real faith and having a desire to get better and learn and taking that initiative to actually improve yourself while you're in prison, that's not a popular way to be.
Yes.
It is not popular, and it can really bring on a lot of problems from your peers. So how did you manage that when you were trying to, you were that crab trying to get out of the bucket and you were learning and you were trying to move forward and you every single day had to recommit? What were the things that mindset, other than giving it over to God, like there were other things that you had to remind yourself. Can you tell us about those?
So here's kind of what, and you're right. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because like a lot of folks don't realize that, like, because, out here in life, for the most part, if you're doing good and you're trying to do the right thing and change, people kind of rally around that for the most part.
Or at least they leave you alone, right?
Yeah, at least they'll leave you alone, right? But it's the very opposite in the prison system, man. It's like doing that makes you an automatic target. And it's like people go out of their way. And I literally had guys and officers go out of their way to make my life, to make my growth a challenge, harder. They would do, officers would search my locker and take away all of my self-study and personal help books that I couldn't show them a receipt for. And they knew I'd get them back, but they knew that it would just take me a week or two to get them back. It was a hassle. Inmates would go out of their way to make sure that I couldn't work out with weights. They tried to take all the weights and do all of these different things to just make life harder. And did it try to discourage me? Absolutely. I would face those times and I'd get really upset. I'd get extremely frustrated a lot of times, man, and did want to throw the towel in and want to get upset and sometimes want to punch a guy in his face. But I think the number one thing that I drew from throughout is in each one of those situations that I faced, the thing that helped me get through them and not react the way that the environment wanted me to is I realized that the number one thing I needed to be able to succeed in life was character. And I realized that every one of these situations, Mike, the officers messing with you and wanting to take you to confinement and the inmates giving you problems and haters, all of these things, I looked at those things and I realized, you know what? Instead of looking at these as, oh man, everybody's against me, everybody's trying to sabotage me, instead I looked at those situations as these are just opportunities to develop some much needed character. And I looked at every one of those, and every time somebody would come against me or every time, the officers would try to do something to just make life harder for me, when those original feelings would rise up and, frustration and anger, I'd stop and I would just realize and go, you know what, if you can handle this the right way and if you can just press through this and respond in a different way, it's just one step closer to developing the character that you need when you walk out of prison. And a lot of that came because I knew, unlike a lot of guys in prison, I knew that once I walked out of prison, there wasn't going to be a party there welcoming me back to society. Like, woohoo, you're free. Welcome. Here's a car. Here's a house. Here's all kinds of stuff. Nobody was celebrating my arrival. Like a lot of guys think that they walk out of prison and like the world is just going to welcome them with open arms. I actually knew that it was going to be quite the opposite. I knew the world was going to slam doors in my face. I knew that people were probably not going to hire me. People were going to judge me. People were going to naysay. They were going to hate. They were going to have all these negative things. And so anticipating that really helped me to face a lot of the internal pressures and challenges in a different way, because I just kind of looked at it as like, this is training ground, right? I need some training ground for what I'm going to face when I walk out.
So good. Like just to recognizing that so early on. So let's talk briefly then about what it was like when you did walk out the gates.
Cool. So, it's been about 7 years now. I've been home. So I walked out of prison in September of 2009. And, I walked out, and one of the things I think that originally overwhelmed me is for folks listening to kind of just get like some perspective on what the world was like. So the world that I left was a world where Google, Facebook, Twitter, none of these things existed ever. I had never even used Google, didn't exist. I'd never seen a flat screen TV, never used a cell phone. None of these things existed in the world that I left. And so I come home to this world that is very fast moving, right? Kids are using cell phones. I remember going to this concert with Robin my first week home, and I seen all of these kids on cell phones, and they look like
fighters.
Yeah, they look like squirrels with nuts. They were just going insane, texting and Facebooking and doing all this stuff. And initially I felt really, really disconnected. I felt like, wow, the world has passed me by. What am I going to do? And so doors did shut. When I tried to get jobs, people would interview me. They'd get excited when they talk to me as, I developed, kind of, the ability to speak and kind of sell myself. But as soon as they'd find out about that record, that was it. They'd shut the door in my face. I would never hear back from them. And so the first few months were extremely challenging. And on top of that, I did get married about 5 weeks after coming home to Robin, who I did meet in prison, which is in a very
whole other story, right?
Yeah. It's a whole nother story, which is in the book. As a matter of fact, it's something that we will be beating out and sharing in depth in the book, how we met and how that worked out. She was a radio DJ and wrote into the station, and long story short, we did meet, and here we are now, almost 7 years of marriage, 2 beautiful kids, successful businesses. Well, we got married about 5 weeks after coming home, and after we got married, she wound up losing the job that she had because she was married to an ex-con. And so here we are, we find ourselves dead broke, ton of bills. There's nobody there to help us. It's just her and I can't get a job. And so we looked at each other and we said, you know what? Never again are we going to allow ourselves to be subjected to what someone else can do or can't do to us. We are going to make our own way, no matter how hard it is, no matter what it looks like. And at that moment, we really didn't know what in the heck we were going to do. And so we looked at each other and we did the only thing we knew to do. And we said, you know what? We're going to go out on trash night and we are going to find items that we can sell on Craigslist. And we did that. Literally went out It was actually cold. It was in Florida, which it does get cold. I know you're in Canada. We have not seen cold, but it gets a little chilly here. We literally would put socks on our hands and we would go out. We would find printers and vacuum cleaners and flat screen computer monitors that people threw away. We'd take them home, make sure they worked, and we would put them on Craigslist and people would buy them. And we did this to fund our dream because we knew at that moment that we needed to get online and create some kind of an online business. We really had no idea where we were going. We were very, very scrappy at those times. And anything that we could get hired for, anything we could get business or make money doing, we did because, we were desperate, we were young, and we just didn't want to work for nobody. And so we did that. And as things kind of progressed, we kind of found our niche and our sweet spot and what we really, really enjoy doing, marketing. And we started doing a lot of like done for you kind of services where we would build websites and we'd build landing pages and help create like online campaigns for folks and whatnot. And that, we were able to grow that business. It took us about 21 months and we grew it to like this multiple six-figure mark.
Mm-hmm. That's wild.
And so the interesting part of that is, and I can kind of regress just a little bit as I walked out of prison, and Robin and I, she waited 7.5 years for me to come home, and we got married, and so there was a tremendous amount of excitement, right? Just excited about life. We were excited, didn't really know what we were wanting to do in life or whatnot, but I can say that the number one thing, and I think this is really what has guided her and I and what has allowed both her and I to see success in business and what we've been able to do. And even though we really didn't know what we wanted to do, what kind of business we were going to build, where we were going to go from that direction, the one thing that we knew that we wanted above all things, no matter what, was freedom. And it probably makes a lot of sense, right? If you're listening, like, yeah, well, that makes sense. This guy spent 10 years in prison. Of course, freedom was very, very important to him, and it was. And so that number one overarching goal of freedom is what drove us. And that was kind of the bullseye that we constantly aimed for. In everything that we did, everything that we built, everything that we were trying to do, that was where we were headed. That was where we were ultimately going. And to be honest, it didn't happen overnight. So for the folks that are listening, it's not like we did that, like, okay, boom, we want freedom. And then 6 months later, we had this $1 million business. We were free. We were taking trips on yachts and doing all this stuff. No, and I say that because in the online world, a lot of folks get discouraged because they see, like the stuff on Facebook. The
marketing.
Yeah, the marketing, right? Like, oh, build a 7-figure business in 19 days and, all of this stuff. Add 72,916 people to your email list in 9 days flat, without batting an eyelash, and like all of these crazy, hyped up marketing things and, people with Ferraris and all this stuff. But the truth really is yeah, you can build that stuff and you can do that, but it really, really takes time. And I love how Gary Vee says that he's an overnight success 10 years in the making,
mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's a point that I really want to share with people that I think helped Robin and I, because we encountered tons of failures. I don't know how many business ideas and directions and, things that we might have tried that just didn't really work out, man. But
you kept trying.
We kept trying. We kept pressing because there was that one thing that we wanted above all. And I like to share with folks that I think the number one most important thing to really just know is your why. Like, what do you want to build? Why do you want to build a business? What's that main driving purpose? Let that be the thing that steers you and directs you. Because if you don't know that, then everything will just pull you in all these different directions and you'll never really know where you're going. And you'll look back and you'll be like, wow, where am I? Why am I here? Kind of thing.
Yeah. Just like in prison, right? If you don't know
Exactly.
that why, it's easy to be a product of your circumstances.
Absolutely. I think prison is probably like one of the most important places because, there's so many things that you can get, distracted by and pulled into. And, one of the things that I remember that I think really made me different in prison is usually for guys in prison that have like as much time as I do, 10 years or more, they generally like to disconnect entirely from society because it's just harder, right? It just makes your time on the inside that much harder if you're paying attention to it's like a constant reminder of how quickly the world is passing you by and how everybody else is living their lives and you're not. But I also knew, and as I saw from the guys that had done that they very quickly became consumed with the world that is prison. And that became who they identified with. And there's a term, institutionalized. And that's what happened to these guys. And so I made a firm commitment that no matter how hard it would be to stay connected and stay in touch and in contact with the outside world. And as that was my world, like I never let prison become my world. I was just physically there. My world was outside of there. It was hard. It was challenging, but I knew that if I didn't, that I was going to become a product of the environment.
Yeah, definitely. Mike, this has been incredible. We've gone a little bit longer than expected, but I just am so appreciative that you're able to share all that. And there's so much more to share, which you're doing in your new book. Do you want to tell listeners about that?
Sure. So the book's called From Prison to Prosperity, and it, really details the journey. We kind of touched on some of the points of it, but really shares, how I wound up where I was and a lot of the mindset and skills that helped me go from, being an ex-con, by society doomed to fail, to being able to build multiple 6- and 7-figure businesses and see success in not just business, but in life and in family and in all facets of life. So if anybody's interested in the book, you can go to FromPrisonToProsperity.com and grab you a copy.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll have that linked as well in the show notes page. If you're out there running around, make sure to stop by bbrshow.com and you can get all of the links that we do talk about. Not that there's so many, but I'm going to make sure that we have everything going to your launch and to your book and to your businesses too. You got a bunch of different businesses that people could check out, and you're doing some fun stuff. So I just want to dig in a little bit more. Tell us more about, it's not just a book. I don't want people to think, oh, okay, well, there's a book that somebody else wrote. Like, this is pretty spectacular, and you're doing some really exciting things to change the world. I mean, you're passionate about not letting inmates who really do have that spark and who are able and willing to push forward and have prosperity. You do a lot to support and serve them. And do you want to talk about that a little bit before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, when I walked out of prison, one of the things that I committed was that I was never going to forget where I'd come from. And what that means is, there are guys on the inside that need to see and need to be told, you have a chance, you can succeed, because that's not the message that they're hearing. And so one of the things that we're doing with the book is, for everybody who buys a book, we're sending a free book to an inmate in prison, to just some random inmate. We're sending them books because this message needs to penetrate the walls. These guys are not being told you can succeed. They're not being told that, no matter what's happened to you, where you've come from, with the right focus, the right commitment, you can make success out of your life. That's not what they're being told. They're being told they're losers, they're always going to fail, they're doomed, and that's it. And so I want to change that, and we are changing that. We do go in and we share with inmates, and there's a lot of guys that I talk to and have a chance to impact. And so this book is really just one more way to get that message of hope and success inside of those walls.
I love it. Yeah. So by, investing in this book, not only can you be personally inspired by Mike's story, you're also, it's where my heart is. Again, I worked with young offenders and youth at risk. And I know a lot of people too who, their kids have wound up making some poor choices and wound up in places that they never thought they could. And this is an opportunity to get that message out to the people who need it the most. And
absolutely,
have people come out that are ready for the world and contributing to society and making a better life. And so I just love what you guys are doing with this. It's so wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, make sure to subscribe on iTunes so that you don't miss another episode. And if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. And if you want to catch up on past episodes, it's super easy to do when you subscribe on iTunes. Also, we're on Stitcher. And of course, you can visit bbrshow.com for all of the episodes, show notes, and more. I would love to hear what you think about today's episode by leaving a review on iTunes, or also you can go to bbrshow.com, and on our show notes page, there is a comment section. Dear listeners, I do this show for you. So the more you let me know what you love, the more I can bring you that. Don't forget that the Business Building Rockstar Show releases every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So 3 times per week, you can listen in to what the journey towards rockstar status entrepreneurship is really like. Until next time, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you, and I look forward to connecting connecting again real soon.
And there you have it. If you enjoyed this episode of the Business Building Rockstars Show, be sure to subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss a thing. And visit bbrshow.com for all the show notes and links to resources discussed on today's show. Plus, lots more.